Okay, so we first want to start by looking at an individual student report with access scores. Many of you will already be very familiar with this. If you take a look at the scores in the box on the left, remembering that access represents a continuum of scores from a level 1 for a non-speaker all the way to level 6 with fully developed English proficient skills. And if you look at these scores, think about what conclusions you can draw with regard to the domain scores. So if you'll just take a minute to process that. So let's take a look at our student who represents the profile of those scores. We'll start off on the right-hand side. This is Maria. She's a middle school student in 7th grade, and she says, speaking is hard. My teacher gives me sentence frames to help me. If you recall, speaking was her domain with the most opportunity for growth. In other words, it was the lowest domain. She also says that she likes to listen to English music. And if you recall, her listening score was a 4.6. So her listening is the strongest domain. And then if you'll recall, her literacy domains of both reading and writing were at level 3 in the developing phase. Maria's ESL teacher has taught her to be metalinguistically aware of her own language skills. And she shares that she can read some novels and she needs it in Spanish as well, but she also needs to talk about it with a partner. And then she shares that her writing is well supported by her teacher, who often supplies graphic organizers or a paragraph frame. And so in 7th grade social studies class, Maria's class is studying the standard that you see on the left-hand side of the slide, and they are analyzing the economic, political, and social impacts of disease in modern societies. Sounds familiar? Let's think COVID. And so her ELD, or English Language Development teacher, met with her social studies teacher to collaborate. And so the ELD specialist was headed to the ELD standards so she could find a standard in English language development in the content area of social studies that aligned with the social studies content standard that they were studying in social studies class. Also, Maria's ELD teacher provided visual supports for her social studies lesson to prompt thinking. You'll see that these are familiar pictures from when the COVID pandemic was in full swing. And so Maria's teacher, in going to the ELD standards, selected explain and expressive content area of social studies, grade bands 6 through 8. The language expectation that she chose to focus on with Maria and her fellow EL or ML students was construct social studies explanations that generalize multiple causes and effects of developments or events, in other words, the COVID pandemic. So, what kind of language could we expect at level 1 if Maria had classmates who were newcomers? They might be able to produce or process single words with regard to the effects or the impacts of the pandemic. At level 2, students would be able to process short phrases, wearing a mask, perhaps I lost my job, and no school. Level 3, at the developing level, students there, such as Maria in literacy domains of reading and writing, might be able to process or produce I wear a mask and I lost my job. Simple compound sentences. There is no school because we have COVID. So the simple connector of because you see typically in level 3. In level 4, we call that expanding for a reason. We've begun our sentence with a clause. Because of COVID-19, schools and restaurants closed. I don't have a job anymore and have to wear a mask sometimes. And then at level 5, you'll see the very technical vocabulary here: financially, educationally, remotely. In level 6, the sky's the limit with language, and you'll see complex, varied sentences with highly technical vocabulary, such as negatively, impacted, remotely, and context. And so, keeping that in mind, with the 6 levels of language, I want us to think about how we could consider the 6 levels of language within another context. So, what I'd like for you to do is to click here on the right hand side. It will make a copy of this slide that you see here. And I want you to find an aligned content standard and an ELD standard for whatever content area you want, whatever grade band level you want, a title of a learning activity that could meet those selected standards, and what language you could expect from students for your learning activity. What language could they produce or process at level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So those are the directions for our 6 levels of language that are embedded in content and for English language development standards.